It is Khaya Late Nights with Bridget Masinga right here on the home of the Afropolitan. As you can hear, I'm very upbeat because our next guest somehow brings the upbeatness. I think we should make you the ambassador of upbeatness.
Hey, I don't know about that. You know the funny thing is, right? About Khaya is that I always get people say to me, "Oh, Khaya, oh, like Khaya FM," and then I always have to pretend that that person is the first person to ever say that. And I'm like, oh yeah, that is so original. So yeah, it's the first time I'm actually on Khaya.
Really? Well, welcome home,
Yeah,
Khaya
no.
Dlanga. Welcome home.
Yeah, thank you.
Jeez, thank you so much for coming through. Let's talk about the Abantu Book Festival, which is a annual literary event that is held out in Soweto. So how are you involved, besides the fact that you were a best-selling author?
Well, this is actually the first one they're having. So it's the first annual festival, because I think the reason behind it was that there were no real festivals in South Africa that focus on black writers, and often black writers in these festivals are almost like an afterthought, and the subject matters that we would like to discuss are not really considered and thought about in these festivals. And I think that was the feeling that, there needs to be a festival that will be unashamedly black in terms of the point of view and the stories that are told, because we really are not represented. I mean, I've been to festivals and where I felt, am I just here as a token? And to go to a panel discussion, and I'm like, this is such a waste of my time being on this panel discussion. Yeah. I'll leave it at that.
You can obviously hear him, Khaya, that he's counting his words very, very carefully. Because I think we always find ourselves in this predicament as Africans, especially black Africans,
Yes.
is because the world is so globalized and we all have to interact in so many levels and different facets. You want to authentically speak your truth, but at the same time, you want to do it in a manner that is non-offensive, because we still have to, for lack of a better word, work together and find some kind of synergy.
Yeah, but I think for me, it's not a matter of like being offensive or, sometimes people think that by being offensive, I'm being oppressive, or I'm really truly expressing what I feel or what I think. But I don't know if that is always the case and that is always true. But also, I mean, sometimes people think that is to demonstrate how radical I am and how extreme I am by being really offensive in the things that I say. There is nothing offensive, I think, about the truth. And what can be offensive is really how one expresses that truth. But also sometimes it's about the person who doesn't want to receive the message that you're giving out, because it makes them uncomfortable. Therefore, they say that, you are being very offensive. Talking about black issues is not offensive. It is just that we are so marginalized, even in our own country. And so that's why we need to find spaces like this where we will be unashamed in our expressions of those black ideas and black thoughts.
Now, Lita wanted me to ask this in Xhosa, but I think Lita is far-reaching. Like, he's got a lot of hope in my capabilities. So if I had to ask you to break down the essence of Ubuntu Bako, Ubuntu Bakhaya, what is that?
I always think that, Ubuntu Bako, or your you-ness, let me put it that way. I'll say your you-ness has a lot to do with your upbringing, who brought you up, where you were brought up, and what lessons you were taught, and what observations you made during that time, and that formed, the basis of who you are. And I mean, for me, it really comes from this village I was born in Transkei, former Transkei, just at Mount Elif, called Dujini. And I was looking after my grandfather's cattle, so I was raised by my grandfather, my grandmother, because my mother had to go and work, in East London, in order to take care of myself and my sister. And so I think the kind of lessons that you get from elderly people, especially very rural people, are very traditional and very different, and I think they kind of reach almost deeper into the soil than, I suppose, like if it was just my mother who raised me, because she would teach me, the lessons that she knows, but then the ones I get from my grandparents like are so deeply rooted in I think the realities of this of old, whatever that means.
No, I got you, because I think the parentals often now, but they've got the filtered
Yes.
lessons of life.
Yes.
You know,
And also
then
they're still young.
there we go.
They're still young. Whereas the parents, her parents have lived a long stretch of life already. So by the
Yes.
time, they may not even need to be teaching me anything. So I am learning by observing them most of the time, because
Yeah.
no one, my grandfather is not sitting and talking to me and say, okay, you see my grandson, this is how life works. It's just what he does and what he tells me to do, and how I must respect other people and why it's important. He never tells me it's important. I just get the understanding, okay, this is very important.
Yeah. Now, I follow you on social media, and I know this little village you talk about is one that's highly documented on your Instagram.
Yes, yes.
And you have, you have a way with words, and that's no secret, which is why you're a best-selling author, and we'll double back to that. But you bring us into your world in a very interesting and very colorful way that we can almost smell the grass and the cow dung on a Sunday afternoon, as you were busy herding your grandfather's cattle over the hills of the Eastern Cape. We get into it with you really deeply. So growing up in that rural environment, how did you then get an understanding to dream beyond? What was that moment, if there was a moment, that had you thinking, what lays beyond there?
I actually, fun enough to say what lays beyond there, because the village is literally, it's very, it's surrounded by these mountain ranges. So when you're a child, you actually wonder, like, what is beyond those mountains? But then when you're even younger, you're thinking, this is the world, this is it. There can't possibly be anything beyond there. But then you grow up and you understand that, people go over there. So,
Yes.
And so I don't know if I had, when I was growing, I always tell the story about how where I grew up, there were literally women, children, and old men. All the young men would go and work in Joburg in the mines. So I was supposed to go and work in the mines. And what people would say to me, so if you pick up a very heavy object, like, oh, you're a strong man now, you ready to go and work in the mines. And then you're so proud and you think that I'm ready to go and drill in the mines. And I really don't know if there was a point in my life where I thought that, hey, wow, this is it. This is the time that I am, I have to dream bigger than this. But I think the one thing that actually gave me an understanding of how big the world can be and what is possible was when my mother started forcing me to read books. And so I don't remember a moment where I thought I can be more than what I am supposed to be, in inverted commas. I think it was a gradual process where the world was revealed to me as I read, as I became even more curious about the world.
And that's where I presume the love of books, the love of literature, the love of writing and construct came from for you?
Oh, yeah. Actually, it's definitely my mother. She used to, because what she did is that she sent me to this good school in the Eastern Cape. And
school.
It was called Little Flower Junior Secondary School. So it was really, really good. I think it was the best school in Transkei at the time, when I was about 10. And I spent about 2 years in that school. And so she'd give me these essays that were written by Alan Paton. And I'd read these essays. And they talked a lot about, the condition that black people found themselves in. And then she gave me Alan Paton's Cry the Beloved Country to read. So when I read that book, I was like, wow. And I always said that that's the book that made me read other books. So it actually answered the question I'd had as a child. I'll never forget, so I was standing by the side of the road, making sure that my grandfather's cattle do not cross over the road and get hit by a car or anything like that. And you see these white people in their fancy cars with boats trailing behind them, fishing rods sticking out, happy white children, and they would stop outside and then, oh, don't I take pictures with the poor black children who are, So it was that for them, it's like, oh, wow, look at this, they're so cute, kind of thing. So you get, and then I remember thinking, I must have been like maybe 8 or 9, I don't know. I'm like, why is it's just the white people who've got the nice stuff? So this was a question that like popped out of nowhere. It's like, why is it just, I don't see black people have these nice things? And that question popped in my mind because I realized that there was something wrong, but I didn't know what it was. And when I read that book, right, The Beloved Country, I was like, oh, it explained to me. This is what is going on in this country. This is what is wrong. And that just made me even more curious, just to read a little bit more about, apartheid, literature that talks about what was going on at the time. So it's definitely books that opened up my world.
So you were black conscientized, so to speak, from a very young age, and via, of course, literature under the guidance of your mom. And then you see that as a young black man in the rurals, you internalize it, you analyze it, and you dissect it for yourself. And what is then that internal thought about, what am I going to do with my life, my purpose, my dreams, my goals when I get beyond those mountains?
It's weird because I never had that. It's strange. And I always find it interesting when people tell me that, when I was 12 or 13 or 20, I realized that this is the thing I was meant to do. I've never had that moment. I've never had that moment where I had this vision about what my life was going to be like. And I do think that there are some people, maybe most people in the world, do have that, where they will have a vision. And I think some of us have that, a journey where we kind of find ourselves in a space where we find ourselves. And it's not necessarily something that was very well constructed and very deliberate, I think, about for me. How I am where I am, it was not a deliberate construct or a conscious construct on my part.
Very interesting. I think this is probably the most interesting and the longest conversation I've ever had with Khaya. And I see you around all the time,
I
Mr.
know.
Khaya Dlanga.
I know.
And half the time you were just laughing and taking
Just turning
selfies.
up.
And you know what I mean? So you are a published author.
Yes.
In fact, your book, to quote myself, was a bestseller. And you came very close to winning the coveted Alan Payton Award as well.
Yes.
We know your book was well received by virtue of the fact that it was a bestseller, so we're not going to ask you that. But
And also, for a time, it was actually the most stolen book in the country.
most stolen.
It was.
That's flattering itself.
I know. I was like, okay, wow, that's interesting.
I love it. So to me, that says, I want to read your book, but I'm financially strapped right now.
Exactly.
So-
And that actually goes to the whole accessibility, accessibility of books for black people.
Yeah.
And that there is a desire and a hunger to read, but the resources are just not there.
Very true, because 224 Rand can be a bit steep sometimes. What's the landscape like for writers? I mean, Kojo did an episode last week with Life with Kojo where he was talking to some writers and some publishers just about the journey and the process thereof. From having now done it and probably going to do it again and again and again, what was that process like for you in terms of going from manuscript to, getting edited, getting published, eventually getting out on the shelves at exclusive? Is it even easy when you are a black writer?
It's hell. But I think for me it was a lot easier because I was approached by my publisher.
Because you had a brand.
And I was there and they asked me to write this book, and I literally said about a year and a half, because I'm like, how I cannot be writing about myself. I mean, it's what have I done for me to warrant to write a book about my life? So I was having this debate with them, and eventually they managed to convince me about a year and a half later to actually write it. And I was like, actually, I'll go ahead and write it. But in that sense, for me, it was easier. And I cannot imagine for someone who sits there, you write a manuscript and then you somehow send it to a publisher and you hope that they will look at it, number one, and number two, when they look at it, they will think that it's something that people will want to read. Because I mean in the forward of my of the second edition of my book, someone wrote an article where he says that can I as a white man tell Khaya Dlanga how to write a book? And so he was basically criticizing, the way I wrote the book or how it was. And so I responded in this blog post, which part of it then ended up becoming part of my forward for the second edition, was that actually the whole idea that white people should be telling black people how to write books is part of the gatekeeping process of storytelling. So it tells us what stories are worthy to be told and what stories are worthy to be heard. And therefore, who are the people who are gatekeeping that process? It's not, you don't have black publishers, you don't have black editors, you don't have, and when you go to bookstores, it's like exclusive books. They are all in fancy malls where people don't necessarily have the access to go to those places. So who are you to say that I should be writing a book in a certain way that is predetermined and prescribed by, a white perspective of the world?
Yeah.
And so for me, I was, and then I went on to say that, and what also pissed me off was that even though my book was a bestseller, it was number last in terms of best.
Yes.
So I think they had a list of like 88, and I was 88. Okay. And I was the only living black writer on that bestseller list. The other two, Long Walk to Freedom, and the other book was I Write What I Like.
Wow.
Those are the only two books that were on there, and mine, and everybody else was not black. So that means, okay, well, yeah, I know that most people who bought my book were definitely black. And then if white people love reading so much and are so supportive of writing, why aren't they also buying black writers? Because obviously they're the ones who seem to be going to buy books, because all the books that are flying off the shelves, or are the stories that we as black people telling not resonating with the black audience? Or if they're not resonating with the black audience, are the gatekeepers, can they relate to the manuscripts that they get? Which means that they probably keep out a lot of books that are relevant and a lot of people can relate to, but because they don't understand them, they push them aside. So there is a lot that really needs to be fixed, I think, in the system in terms of writing and exposing people to literature.
Yeah, no, I definitely feel that. And you make some valid points. In fact, I never thought about the gatekeeping, the systematic gatekeeping of the process.
Yes.
And I've spoken to a lot of black writers, and we've spoken a lot about a lot of things, but never before has someone articulated that point, and it makes perfect sense.
And I mean, another thing, because my book was being stolen so much, they put it on it was not on the shelf. So you'd go to exclusive books.
It's behind the counter.
And you would look and you wouldn't find it. Even there behind the counter, maybe you're not even seeing it there. So people would go and look, because some people are shy. So they're not going to go to the counter and ask, hey, where can I find such and such a book? Because it's either hidden in some corner, it's not exposed. Again, it's another form of gatekeeping. So it's going to be a long process before I think we get to a place where black writers, I think, get the prominence they deserve.
So such festivals as the Abantu Book Festival, which is happening in Soweto from the 6th until the 10th of December, are then vital, and they become, the point of entry for those that want to consume black literature. And I think there's a lot of people. I mean, we've had this conversation with a number of people, myself, even with my friends. We started a book club in winter, and it was the unsaid rule that every book choice will be by a black writer.
Yes.
Whether South African, Ghanaian, whatever, they must be black and tell a black story. You've now jumped on board to be a part of the Abantu Book Festival. And why did it resonate with the brand Khaya Dlanga, and what you hope to do as an author, and where you hope to take, I guess, the future of writing?
Well, I think really what's fantastic about it is that you black writers won't feel so isolated. So I think there's a sense where you feel very alone. There's so few of you, and so there will be a sense of community. I think in that, because it is so as important as it is to meet people who have diverse views and diverse thoughts, comes from diverse backgrounds. It is equally important to encounter people who have very similar views, very similar backgrounds to you, to solidify certain things about yourself and about who you are, and I think that is the one aspect that I appreciate about this, and also because I really am still truly upset by the fact that my book was the only one out of 88 books that was on the bestseller list by a black writer. It is unconscionable in a country that is mostly black. And I think for me, it's the one thing that truly gets to me, that I cannot comprehend. I cannot understand how that is possible. Where there are so many stories that can be told and so many experiences people are going through, but there's only one book on that list. How is that possible? And I think for me, it's the narrative. It's that narrative that I really hope over the next 5-10 years somehow manages to shift, where the bookshelves in this country will show that we are living in a majority black country. Right now, if you go to exclusive books, you will think that we live in a country that is 2% black. And that is not the case. And also that is not to say that we have to exclude white writers. This is why I think it's important to I appreciate diversity of thought, diversity of ideas, and whether I agree with those ideas or not, but it's important for them to be represented. But ours are hardly ever represented. So this is why this platform is important.
Wowza. So, Khaya, before we let you go, what is inspirational to you, both as a writer, a social commentator, and a South African, when you look at the current literature landscape, and you look at the writers out there, and you look at, because there are people telling stories, I'll bet they don't have platforms, but there are people telling them. What is inspirational? What gives one a sense of hope that, don't lose the momentum? Keep at it. Keep chipping away at those barriers.
I think for me, again, I must always speak about my own privilege, and the fact that I happened to have blogs that I was writing, and they happened every now and then people would read them. They became popular, and publishers, and for me, for a long time, for about 2 years, just over 2 years, I was writing a blog a week without getting paid a cent. And it took about more than 2 years for someone to actually offer me and say, okay, you're very consistent, we are actually going to start paying you to write. It is not an overnight thing, and a lot of people think that simply because they write, or they show how well they can write, means that their messages can be received. And one of the big mistakes I think a lot of people who are really, really good writers is that they concentrate so much on how well they can write, as opposed to, does the message I am trying to put out there connect with the person who's going to be reading this book? So am I more interested in sounding intelligent than in making sure that the message lands? And I think that is probably one of the biggest mistakes. And I remember reading a story about Hemingway, where he apparently, a lot of writers were disturbed by how simple his language was, and how he just used simple words, short sentences, colloquial language of the time. But he was writing for the people who are living in that time. So you've got to make sure that you talk in accordance to that. And you're not writing an academic paper. And maybe it is how I see the world. It's just that I need to express myself in a way that I'm understood. And whether people don't understand what I said, at least they heard what I said and it resonated with them somehow and got them angry, got them laughing, got them crying. And not to show off how smart I am.
I definitely think that our very own Afropolitan magazine editor, a newly published author, Lerato Shabalala, will be in agreement because when she wrote, probably in the first chapter or so of her book, In My Own Words, that's exactly what she speaks to. She speaks to, I wrote this book with myself and my friends in mind. So if people pick it up, what you read are words that came out of Lerato. So if you know me, you resonate that, okay.
That's
right,
definitely her.
This is her.
Yes.
You know, and that was one of those books as well that, as you said, people like hate it, love it. I'm not going to ask you what your thoughts were. We'll leave it that way. So the Abantu Book Festival is happening from the 6th till the 10th of December in Soweto. Do you know anybody but yourself who's going to be on the panel?
No, there are lots of people.
Exhibiting?
Lots of people who will be, and I mean, one of my favorites is Professor Dineo, because she's the one who won the Alan Paton Prize, and she's just one of the many writers who'll be there. And I think if you go to listen to anyone, she's probably the one person that I would go and listen to. She's not one of those professors that are like, beyond rich that
Yes.
you don't want to talk to because, oh my goodness, she is so relatable and breaks down very complex ideas simply and in a very refreshing and, open way. And sometimes I wish I was her.
No, I think you also have that talent. Khaya Dlanga, thank you so much for coming through to Late Nights with Bridget Masinga. You are an absolute gem. For those of you who don't know, he's pretty big on Twitter and Instagram. I think he's bigger on Twitter than he is on Instagram, right?
It was 300,000 on Twitter. 100,000 on Instagram, so yes.
There we go. He's one of the cool kids on social media.
Yeah.
You can find him there. And if you do head out to the Soweto Festival between the 6th and the 10th of September, he will be around. And I'm sure if you bring your copy of To Quote Myself, he will gladly sign it for you.
Yes, if you're nice.